Chazal.
Which one?
Daily Rambam for Wednesday, Beis Kislev Tafshin Pei Aleph, the 24th Perek Arba V'Esrim of Hilchos Shabbos. So in the previous Perek, we concluded the list of inyanim, list of things that are aser as a shvus due to the link to various malachas of the Lamatas malachas. So, for example, yesterday we had a gzera about not saving things from the house as an extension, a very, very distant extension of mechaba, things like that. So today in this parak, we're continuing with other matters that are, by definition, a shvus, but they don't fit into any of the 39 malachas. They're also for a different. So we start parak above Esrim Malacha Aleph. Yesh dvarim shehem asurim b'Shabbos. There are things that are also in Shabbos, even though they are not reminiscent, they don't resemble any malacha, and they do not lead one to perform any malacha. This is meant to sort of be referring to what we said at the beginning of Perek Chav Aleph. In Perek Chav Aleph, when we started the three prakim of Shavusim, so we said there are also reputation doim in the malachas or gzeira shemayavim mehenis. This is the opposite. That it's not doimen and it's not maybe. So mipnei ma nesru. So in that case, why are they prohibited? B'shem shenemar in Yeshaya, we say it before Kiddush Shabbos day. Im tasha mishabbos raglecha asayis chafatzecha b'yom kadshi. If you restrain your foot because of Shabbos, restrain yourself from performing your affairs on my holy day. And the if continues in the next pasuk, then Hashem will reward you. But this is one long clause of if. So if you do this, the Rambam, it doesn't mention the middle here, and then the pasuk continues, you honor it by not doing your regular things, by not pursuing your affairs, daber davar, speaking words that relate to that. Something one should avoid on Shabbos.
It's a very good question.
Because
this is Nevi'im. You can't learn out an Isser from Nevi'im. You can only use it as an Asmachta. So over here you tell me it's also to do it on Shabbos. Give me a source in Doirais and then use Nevi'im as an Asmachta.
Right.
The Rambam always uses Nevi'im as an Asmachta.
Right. We're saying it's a Shavos, so it's essentially a Draban. Yeah.
No, you can't. You cannot create a Drabanan from a Nevi'im. It has a source in Doiraisa. You can only use Nevi'im as an asmachta, as a support for Doiraisa. You can't create an Issa from a Doir. You're adding to the mitzvahs that way. You're not allowed. Yeah, it can only be derived from a Doiraisa. The Rambam is using Nevi'im as a source, and Nevi'im can only be an asmachta.
Yeah. So we're saying it is a Drabanan, and we're citing these psukim. How exactly the psukim and Nevi'im work, that's a subject on its own. Yeah. So, Lefichach Aser La'adam, so what does this pasuk mean practically? Lefichach Aser La'adam, Lahalech B'chafatzav B'Shabbos. So therefore one can't go about carrying out one's matters on Shabbos. So that's Muntzei Cheftzcha, pursuing your matters. V'afil L'daber B'hem, even to discuss them. So that's V'daber Davar. K'goyin, Shi'adaberim Shutafei Ma'yimker L'macher, or Ma'yikna. Hey, Achivna Ba'yezeh, Ba'yezeh Schayri Yelech L'ma complaining. So, for example, even if you're not pursuing anything, but you're discussing with your partner, you're having a practical business conversation. You're saying, what am I going to sell? What am I going to buy? What am I going to build? What the merchandise will I take somewhere? This is all prohibited. Anything like it. Shenemar, Medaber Davar, Dibur Asur, Vehirhur Mutter. So, you're not allowed to discuss it. You are allowed to think it. Like I mentioned yesterday from the Zmiris of Mayadidus, so now you can understand a few more phrases. The Chafatzecha Asurim, to pursue your own matters. The Kamash Cheshbonis that we learned yesterday from Ksiva, and Herhurim Mutarim. You're allowed to think about it. Halacha Beis, so some examples. Asur Adam Lifkat Yunosav V'Stosav V'Shabbos Gelidus Mahin Tzrichin. A person can't pay a visit to his gardens, to his fields on Shabbos to see what they need, how the fruit's doing. You're going to take care of your business. Person's not allowed to go on Shabbos to the very end of the Tchum where he's allowed to go, and then just sit there until it gets dark. So that way he has a head start. He can be closer to the matters he wants to take care of. Matzah Shabbos, he's right there. Because that means that he essentially was walking on Shabbos, going on Shabbos, to take care of non-Shabbostic things.
All that Rambam had to do was say that it is doime, and he would have. He's saying it's not. It's malacha. All you have to do was leave out that phrase, and all this would have made more sense. That taka could lead you to a malacha if you go back to the end of the.
We're not saying it's going to lead you to a malacha. We're saying that it turns out you're walking on Shabbos. Let's see the Maggid Mishnah. The Maggid Mishnah says, Tosfos says that Rambam is going to say that later that you're going to get Paris, mechubaran, let's say Paris. So Tosfos says that's usher only if you're literally sitting by the tchum, because then it's obvious that what was that whole walk you just took for? The whole walk accomplished nothing. It only helped you to accomplish something after Shabbos. But if it's b'toicha tchum, then it's not so nicker. We can't tell what you're doing, where you're going. So if you walk to your garden b'toicha tchum to wait till the nighttime, meaning the beginning of Halacha Beis, you go to the garden to actually start watching, looking, inspecting. But if you walk to your garden on Shabbos and it's within the Tchum, you don't have to, and then you just sit there till Matzah Shabbos, that would be allowed according to Tosfos, and he says Ramban and Rashba agree, and it looks like from the Rambam that Ram also would agree because he said Al-Tzei Tchum. So you're not really doing anything wrong. We're not even concerned that you're going to do anything wrong. It's just whether it seems like you're sitting in the middle of nowhere, and that means it transpires retroactively that the whole trip, the whole walk, was simply for Matzah Shabbos, or where it's not so obvious, like the Maggid Mishnah says, then it might not be a problem. Halacha Gimel, cases in which it's mutter. This is aser if the whole reason why you're sitting there at the border of the tchum is because you're waiting to do something that's aser. But if you waited there simply because you couldn't walk any further, the tchum stopped you, but really you wanted to go further and do something that you could have otherwise done on Shabbos anyway, then you could go get a head start on Shabbos. So this is sort of clarifying what we said in the previous halacha. Why were you sitting by the tchum? You were sitting there because you wanted to go pluck pears that were still attached. That's not something you can do on Shabbos or to hire workers. But if you're sitting at the edge of the tchum because you want, as soon as Shabbos is over, walk further so you can guard your pears, if that was within the tchum, you were allowed to do that on Shabbos. Or you can wait there to go get an animal or to get fruit that was already off the tree. The animal, he was allowed to, if he is closer to the animal, he was allowed to call out that it would come. Even if it's outside the tchum, you're allowed to get the animal to walk to you. And pay this tlushim and the fruit that's not attached to the tree. If they're mechitzas, you would be allowed to bring them home. So, so in this sense, maybe it is even within reach. You just can't bring them back. And he's waiting so he can start carrying again. The person can also tell his friend, that I want to go somewhere. So this is in this sense, you didn't actually do anything. This is a case of dibur. That you're not allowed to tell your friend, I'm going to buy schayra tomorrow, because that's not something you're allowed to do now. But if you tell your friend, I'm going to this city tomorrow, if between here and that city there were a bunch of burganin, it's halacha that the Rambam discusses in Perek Chavches, that if you have along the way, guard booths along the way, something like that, if it's within a certain space, if they're all within a short space of each other, you would be allowed to go all the way. It would extend the tchum all the way. So that's something you would be allowed to say on Shabbos because there's nothing inherently wrong with walking. So you always have to take into account in the mitzvah chevtz chavadavar davar, is whatever action you did take on Shabbos, was it for something that was prohibited or was it for something that in theory was permitted? We're going to see more about the Shmira also in Halacha Ches when we get there. Additional things along these lines, also from the words in the pasuk Me'aseh Terachacha and V'da'ar Davar, as we shall see. So the Rambam says, "Mutal Adam lemer l'poyel hanirish atamed imi la'erev, you're allowed to speak vaguely to your worker and say, "Do you think you'll be able to meet me tonight? You'll be able to come with me tonight?" But you can't say the statement, "Be ready for me." When you say he's not really saying anything. It's implied, but it's not stated. When you tell someone, "Be ready for me," that's stated. You're telling them that you should work for me. Magen Mishnah says that it's a Gemara. Bishum and Karcha says, "Omer Adam lachaveri hanir shetam animal erev." Rabbi Yechanan said, "Allah Bishum and Karcha," and the Gemara says, "My timer, but daber davar dibur also here." The Gemara uses this phrase to explain this din that you can say hanir shetam animal erev, because in this phrase there's a spoken part and there's an unspoken part. So Rashi says, even though they both know, why is he telling this guy, "Can I meet you tonight?" It's understood, it's implied, but given them a fadish behedya, because he never actually said what for, and he didn't tell him, "I need to meet you." He said, "Can I meet you? Will you be around?" So the unspoken part, the hearer, is mutter. And the Rambam is the one who added this, the other side. The Gemara didn't say that, but it's understood from the Gemara. Another halach is that one's not allowed to run and skip on Shabbos. Another phrase in this pasuk: the way you walk on Shabbos should not be the way you walk during the weekday. So that's going in your normal way. So that's also a Gemara in Shabbos. The Magen Mishnah quotes that you shouldn't do a psiya gasa. And there's a Gemara in Brachas that Rabbi said that in the beginning, when I saw Chachamim running on Shabbos to the Pirka, to the Drasha, I said they're being Machal Shabbos. That was Rabbi first reaction. Then I heard from Shul ben Levi that you are allowed to run to the Bar Mitzvah, which we're going to see in the next halacha here in the Rambam. But that was the end of the statement. At the beginning, though, Rabbi said they're being Machal Shabbos, they're running. However, in Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber writes in Siman Shin Aleph that Bechurim hamisangim b'kfitzasam u'mrutzasam mutter, that young men who enjoy the jumping and the running, it's a pastime for them. In that case, it's mutter, and achein lira is called davar shemisangimai, presumably to run, to go see something that brings you enjoyment is also okay.
It's a form of walking, yes.
V'yered adam ber. V'shiach u'ma'ara afilu hein mea ama u'matapis v'yered v'shaisa u'matapis v'ayla. An example of something which is not a problem: a person can climb all the way down into a pit, into a well, even if it's 100 amma. You can climb all the way down and drink, climb all the way up. That's not included in the problematic movement on Shabbos. Also, and you're not allowed to just to sit around and talk about not important things, nonsense. Shenemar v'daber davar. The speech, the speech in Shabbos should not be the same as speech during the weekday.
But if you have people doing that, you don't tell them to stop. You tell them to go away and do it.
This might be in a category of mutiv shiu shagan if it's like all the other shvusim that we were learning about.
No,
seems to.
Should you sit with them?
No, you shoo them away, and they go away. They're enjoying Shabbos.
So first of all, if they're enjoying it, that had to. So let's see what Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch. Right. So first of all, before we get to Alter Rebbe, the Magen Mishnah says when the Rambam says "V'asel harbis b'sicha b'teila," so the Gemara just says "Shlo yehi diburcha shel Shabbos k'diburcha shel chayil." Doesn't spell out exactly what that means. What kind of speech is weekday Shabbos?
The reason I'm saying that is once you sit at the table, try. There are other people that are talking. I said, "Do me a favor, you don't do it next door." So they dispersed.
Mm-hmm.
So the guy was very resistant about it because that's what he said.
Right.
My question is,
could you do
so if it was during Shabbos, might not have been a problem. On the other hand, in the base medrash, they shouldn't be disturbing learning. I mean, there's other factors. There's also tichacha. There's the right way of commenting to people, and the way that has the right effect and not the wrong effect. It's different calculations, different factors.
My question is, where's the dogish? Is it on the fact that they were disturbing and they shouldn't talk about or is it the fact that they weren't doing something wrong?
So I'm saying Lavdafke, it's wrong. I want to get to that in a moment. Let's see. When we get to Alter Rebbe, we'll see how he says it, and then we'll see if we still have a question. So just before I get to Alter Rebbe, the Gemara just says, Shlei de Baruch Shabbos, de Baruch Shalchayil. He doesn't spell it out. Rashi says, we're talking about this kind of dibur. The Gemara said, what do you mean? That's Mitzvah Chavtzacha. That in essence is another form of Mitzvah Chavtzacha, dealing with your sales and your calculations. So it's speech, but it's advancing your actual chavtzacha, so that's more of Mitzvah Chavtzacha. So that was a question on Rashi. However, in Yerushalmi, Itaka says that even Sicha B'Teila is also, that's the marker. But it says there that Rabbi Chia Bar Abba said that Shimon ben Yochai, when he used to see his mother talking a lot, he would say, Ima Shabtahi, mother, it's Shabbos. That's the story in Yerushalmi. So that's the marker for, and that could explain what the Bavli meant. When the Bavli said the Baruch Shabbos, the Baruch Shalchayil, so Rashi's Pirush might be questionable. So we can use this Yerushalmi and explain it to be referring to the Sicha B'Teila, and that's what the Rambam seems to be saying here. However, earlier in Halacha Aleph, it was sort of mixed together. The Rambam did throw in V'daber Davar there as well when he was talking about Mekach HaMemker. In any case, you look at the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Simish and Zion. So the Alter Rebbe puts both in V'daber Davar. The Alter Rebbe writes in Halacha Aleph V'daber Davar. Simish and Vav is about Mitzvah Chavtzacha more, and Simish and Zion is more about V'daber Davar. So the Alter Rebbe says that Chacham Darshan Shlei de Baruch Shabbos de Baruch Shalchayil. So you shouldn't say I'm going to do such and such tomorrow. And even if it's not something that's mamish also to do on Shabbos, just Divrei Seifrim like Schiros, Mekach HaMemkar, these things which themselves are only Shavuos as we learned. So that's the Baruch. So that's the first thing Alter Rebbe says. The Baruch Shabbos, Baruch Shachayil is referring to Mekach HaMemkar the way Rashi wrote.
That's where it comes from. The whole saying Nishkaret.
I'm gonna mention that. I was gonna get to that. And even though Alter Rebbe says, even though the fact that you're mentioning it now isn't even advancing your cause, it isn't even helping you get anything accomplished tomorrow. This is not like telling your friend, do this for me, we're going to do this, actually planning something. That's more of Mimtzei Chavtzacha. That's a distinction. Mimtzei Chavtzacha is that you're actually planning and discussing and implementing a plan. If you hadn't said it, it wouldn't happen. Because you said it, therefore it's happening. That's literally pursuing your affairs on Shabbos. That's Mimtzei Chavtzacha. Masha'enken here, all he's saying is, I'm going to do this tomorrow. So you can't call it Mimtzei Chavtzacha. But still also Mishum V'daber Davar, that's where V'daber Davar, Shlei, Devorah B'Shabbos, V'Shabbos Shachayil, that's the form of Mekach HaMemkar that's unique to V'daber Davar.
Are you going to say I'm taking a flight tomorrow?
That's what he's talking about. You can't, according to Alter Rebbe. And even to say I'm going to do a certain mitzvah tomorrow is also if it's a mitzvah that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. And even though we're going to learn in Halacha Hey about Cheftzei Shemayim that mitzvahs sometimes have an exemption for some of the stuff. That's only when you're actually accomplishing. There, it's the opposite. There, you have to be accomplishing something by talking about it. When it comes to Mekach HaMemkar, talking about it is Mimtzei Chavtzacha, and just mentioning it is V'daber Davar. When it comes to the Heter Cheftzei Shemayim, if you're actually accomplishing something, that's good. But if you're just saying, I'm going to do a mitzvah tomorrow, I'm going to fly out to fundraise, you're not fundraising now, so you're not accomplishing anything, so that's actually Aser V'daber Davar. And then Alter Rebbe adds this other thing that I mentioned here, that even Dvarim B'Teilim that don't reference any Asiyas Malacha, you're still not allowed to do a lot of that on Shabbos. Also, Dibur Shabbos shouldn't be Dibur Chayil. And Alter Rebbe adds people that talking about Shmuas, news, rumors, Divrei Chidushim, interesting things, new things, that's their Eineg, so then they are allowed to talk about that on Shabbos just like on a weekday. But even during the weekday, B'nai Torah shouldn't be talking about this too much because that's Moshe Vleitzim. And if someone doesn't enjoy those things on Shabbos, so then he's not allowed to say it on Shabbos because he thinks his friend is going to enjoy it. That's not enough of a reason. He has to enjoy it himself. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says about that. Now there is, famously, a lot of people say, Nishtam Shabbos Geret. By the way, just a linguistic thing. A lot of people, I think, today's watered down Yiddish, people say nisht in, it's not in, it's nisht which is not as common a word nowadays, but is a word that means on, nisht Shabbos Gered, not on Shabbos. The Rebbe actually uses this phrase in a number of places, it's always nisht Shabbos Gered. However, as people have pointed out, the Rebbe uses it in a very specific way. When the Rebbe is it's even in the Sikha somewhere when the Rebbe says, the guests are going to go home after Shabbos, Nishtam Shabbos Geret. The Rebbe is making a point, and the Rebbe is mentioning a malacha, and even when the Rebbe mentions a malacha, Derech Agav, the Rebbe says, Nishtam Shabbos Geret, that this is not an appropriate thing for sure. This is not something one will do on Shabbos, but to just sit around and plan things, to say, I'm going to do this tomorrow, I'm going to do that tomorrow, that's Mimtzei Chavtzecha. So that saying Nishtam Shabbos Geret would have seemingly no effect. However, the Eshel Avram of B'chach, the Chassidish Pesach from about 100 years ago or so, he actually mentions a similar earlier minig that people used to say, Bli Neder Shabbos. They would talk about their business, they would say, Bli Neder Shabbos. And so first of all, he says, I don't know where Bli Neder comes in over here. He says, maybe it was originally Bli Heder Shabbos, and the ayin turned into a nun. But anyway, he says, if it's hefsed merubah, you're meeting someone, you don't know if you're going to meet him after Shabbos, and it's very urgent. So maybe if you're being meshana in your dibur, if you're changing your dibur to such an extent that it's not the normal manner of speech, maybe we can make a case that this is not dibur b'Shabbos because you're not really talking the way you talk during the weekday. So maybe by throwing in this bli neder Shabbos and mentioning Shabbos, maybe somehow it helps. But interesting that he mentions a similar practice and tries to find some kind of justification.
That's why maybe when the Saudi Aliyahs also don't use terms of money.
So I'm going to get to Aliyahs soon. That relates to Halacha Hey. We're going to get to details that relate to that. Halacha Hey. Mutter lotus b'Shabbos advar mitzvah. So now these are things. So we said a bunch of things that are aser. So now the oifen hamutter if it's for a mitzvah. Mutter lotus b'Shabbos advar mitzvah. You can run on Shabbos. It's for a mitzvah. Can shiyoros the beis haknasis or the beis hamedrash. You run into shul or the beis medrash, which is what Reb Zayda said in the Gemara that he found out they're running to the drasha. That's okay. You can make calculations relating to a mitzvah. You can do measurements. These are things we said yesterday and all to do. You go in mikveh. Leidam yish kashir. You're simply measuring the mikveh to see if it's the right size. A beged leidam mekabel tumah, or you want to know if this is the size of a piece of clothing that's mekabel tumah. Upeiskin stakal aniyim. You can pledge money to poor people. V'herchen lebatik nesis lebatik midrashis u'afilu letartiyos u'takn shel goyim lefakeach al iskedam b'Shabbos. And you can make the rounds. You can go to I don't know if Batik Nesis Batim Midrashis is of the Yidden or of the Goyim, it continues Afil Shel Goyim. But the point is, you can make the rounds to various locations, even to the Tartiyos or the theaters. Traklin, Traklin is a word familiar with in Perek Avos. It's a word that actually we have it in English. Well, it's a Latin word that's in English. The triclinium. Triclinium was the dining room in the Roman culture. Like a table with 3 couches around it to lean on while you eat. So that's the traklin. So you can make your rounds to the Goyish theaters or the dining rooms, the halls. Why? If you feel that the public stands to gain by you showing up and hearing what's going on and poking your nose in to find out. So that's all something that's mutter under the rubric of Iskei Rabim, Tzarech Mitzvah, Dvar Mitzvah. And you can make a shidduch, you can make an agreement about a young girl to get engaged, because that was the practice then, to make engagements at young ages. And that's also mentioned in the Zmiris L'Shavos, L'Shadach Habanas, V'al HaTinoik, L'Lamdei Sefer, L'Lamdei Umnas, and shidduch here is being used to refer to a number of things. You can make an arrangement for a child to learn from a Rabbi or a child to learn a job. You're allowed to visit the sick and comfort the mourners. And if you are visiting a sick person, which we also say in the Mishaberach now, for a chayla, that's the Shabbos is not a date to cry out to Hashem, and hopefully the refuah is on the way. We said earlier, you're not really supposed to wait near the tchum till Matzah Shabbos for regular things, but if it's to take care of Achnasas Kala, helping a Kala get married, or helping a mess get buried, to get the items you need to bury him, and you can tell someone, go to such and such a place. If you didn't find it there, go get it from somewhere else. So you're having a full discussion about what needs to be done. If you don't find it for 100, get it for 200. So these are all discussions you can have on Shabbos for these mitzvahs. But as long as you don't mention a precise amount. So saying 100 and 200, those are round numbers, rounding it up, rounding it down, but not the specific price. Anything that we mentioned or anything similar is a mitzvah. Benemar asois chafatzacha. Also said in the beginning, asois chafatzacha or medayek chafatzacha asurin. Your things are asur. Chafti shemayim, heavenly matters, mutar, and they are mutar. The Maga Mishnah towards the beginning of this halacha says, "V'da shaloi hutar shum shvus b'shvil iskei Rambam." We're giving heterim here for these things, but no other shvus is mutter. You can't just go down the list of shvusim and just start doing all of them for a dvar mitzvah. Lo yamir l'nochri, v'lo shvus acher. Just these types of things. Pikuach, you're not actually doing a malacha. You're just overseeing stuff like that. And for a yachid, that would be v'daber davar, and we're saying that it's mutter for the dvar mitzvah, the tzarech Rambam. But to tell a guy to do a malacha, meaning amir l'nachri to do a shvus b'makom mitzvah is mutter, but amir l'nachri to do a real malacha b'makom mitzvah, so what you're doing, the amir l'nachri maybe is a shvus, but the malacha, the guy himself is going to do an actual malacha that you're not allowed to do. Any other shvus for by yid you're not allowed to do. And it's clear from the Gemara, from the Rambam, mentions actually that the Nichma Velam and the Bikr Chaylim is actually machlekes B'Sham Yisrael. B'Sham Yisrael you're not allowed to, and Yisrael said you're allowed to. We pass like Yisrael. Now we mentioned about Paiskin Tzedakah. We're talking about Chafsei Shemaim, so that relates to the question mentioned yesterday about keeping track of the money from pledges. So we see here Paiskin stuff you can make a pledge, and Chafsei Shemaim there's an exception here. So for things like this, Cheshbon Shel Mitzvah, but actually the Alter Rebbe in Siman Shin Vav elaborates on some. There's actually a lot of halachas there that relate to what we're learning in this Perek. I'm just going to focus on these halachas relating to Paiskin Staka and things like that. The Alter Rebbe says you're allowed to pledge money for poor people because that's a Dibur Shel Mitzvah, and you can't compare it to Hektish. Yesterday we said you're allowed to be Makdish and be Meirich. Seemingly that's also pledging to Tzedakah. Isn't that what Hektish is? You're saying I'm giving this thing to Tzedakah. Why is that not okay and this is okay? So he says over there with Erchen specifically, when you say Erech Ish Pleini, I'm going to pay the value, so you're literally pledging an amount. So it's different though, because there when you pledge an amount based on a person's age, based on a person's worth, there's a shtickle kinyan there. It's like you're being kaina that person, you're paying his value. So it's like you're paying for a person, you're buying a person, and you're giving the money to Hashem. So that's a bit too much like Mekach Memkar. They have that element of that, the value of that person. Mashenk in Tzedakah, you're just saying, I'm giving $100 to Tzedakah to help this person. There's no Mekach Memkar. Also, why you're not allowed to give away an object to Hashem? Because when you're being makdish a chayfetz, so you're essentially transferring the ownership mirashus l'rashus. And you were makdish something that used to be yours till a moment ago, and now you're makdish it, and now it belongs to Hashem. It's also like Mekach Memkar. But if you just pledge and show, I'm going to give X, Y, and Z for my house, it's still in your house, it's still in your rishos, it's just a pledge. So that's also the difference between hektish and pledging and shul.
What about buying a mitzvah like we spoke about? Like auction, buying
yeah, so 1 second. So let's just go through a lot of details. So the Alter Rebbe says, Lafizeh would be usher to be makdish on Shabbos, a specific thing like a Sefer Torah or an Atara or a tas, some kind of plate that goes over the Sefer Torah. Because in that case, maybe it does seem like you're already giving it mirashus l'rashus. That the minhag is not to be makbid to not do that. And there's another limud zchus that Alter Rebbe says that it's only also to be makdish something to the mizbeach when once you give it to the mizbeach, once you give it to hektish, you have nothing to do with it anymore. It literally, you leave it in the base of mikdash and you go home, you'll never see it again. When you pledge something to the shul, even when it's in the shul, you're going to derive hana from it along with the whole community. The Sefer Torah is for everybody. Everyone has a schus in the hekdeshus of the Beis HaKnesses. You can also sell it on behalf of the shul. So it's not like Mekach Memkar where it's completely leaving your rishus. However, the Alter Rebbe says it's good to be careful if you're makdish an object, if you're planning on pledging to give it on Shabbos, to already be makdish it with your verbally an erev Shabbos, even to yourself. And then on Shabbos, when you bring it to shul, you're just being mefarsim that you're really makdish something from before. Alter Rebbe also says yesh oimim in a place where they give a misha berach for someone who gets an aliyah, and it's bavur shenadar tzedakah or lachazon. Apparently, some have the minhag of pledging to the Balkaida. So you're not allowed to. He's not. So yesh oimim, he's not allowed to say how much. He can't say 5 times chai, whatever the number is. He has to say. But the minhag is to be mekel because it is mutter to pledge money on Shabbos. The Rebbe says, however, the chassan back then you had the drasha geshank. The chassan would say a drasha by his wedding or by the Sheva brachas, and then people pledged the gifts. The gifts were considered to be an exchange for the drasha. That's why the presents used to be called the drasha geshank. So if the chassan is darshaning on Shabbos, you have people that say, "Oh, that was a great, beautiful drasha, mazel tov. I'm giving you such and such. I'm pledging to give you this and this amount after Shabbos." It's not good because that's not tzedakah, and this is the rishus. You're not allowed to do it. There's also those who bring their gifts. They're bringing actual gifts to the chassan on Shabbos. They give him a cutlery set, something like that. You can't do it on Shabbos. You also can't give matanas on Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's also from a mekach umemker. You can only give food and drink for that day. So otherwise, this is essentially even hektish to Hashem you're not allowed to do.
Are you allowed to bring a bottle of wine if you're eating somewhere and you can carry?
So that's minei meichel mashkel shel tzedek hayom. Yeah. Now the Rebbe also mentions there in the next halacha that what if the shul auctions it off? Not a misha berach where after the aliyah you make a pledge. What if they auction off the mitzvahs, high dollar for the mitzvahs, and people can bid? So the chayret should be also misha mekach umemkar because that's a full shvos. That's not a kind of thing that's mutter like the Maggid Mishnah said. We weren't matter every shvos in the book, just these types of things. But you can miyasher the minhag b'derech that the Rebbe says, and we can say that mekach umemkar only applies to when you're actually acquiring an object, when you're bidding or auctioning off an object. But here, you're just auctioning off mitzvahs. However, the Alter Rebbe says, in that case, it would be ushered if you're auctioning off a seat in the shul. You can't sell a seat in the shul on Shabbos. Things like that. Now, the right thing, the way some people, Anshe Maisa, do, is that if there's an auction on Shabbos, and even if you lost the bid, even if you put in the losing bid, you should still pay your pledge, your bid. That way, it's not really mekach umemkar. Everyone just basically pledged the highest amount that they're willing to give to tzedakah, and then they all give it in the end, so it wasn't really an auction. But then you can even sell seats in the show. If you want to sell a seat and then everyone pays, then it's okay. Yisrael should be careful. So this is negay, I guess. Have to be careful. Shabbos Bereshis. If you just do it, Shabbos Bereshis in the show.
And then the second highest bid has to pay too.
Okay, so these are the halachas here in the Shulchan Aruch. Alter Rebbe also mentions one more thing that Alter Rebbe mentioned something interesting about selling a sregim. They had a practice of selling a sregim in the show, and they would sell it. They would auction it off or sell it after the mitzvah. He says after the mitzvah, it's like buying a seat in the show. There's no heter unless everyone pays.
What's shot after the mitzvah?
I didn't have a chance to look up to see the background as to what the people wanted to have the schos of keeping it, I guess. I'm guessing. But Bismam mitzvasan.
The esrog lost its value after Sukkot.
So bear in mind, back then there weren't enough esrogim to go around. There were a few communal esrogim, and apparently at the end of Sukkot, they auctioned them off. So, it was exciting if you can get your hands on an esrog, at least after Sukkot. Esrogim nach Sukkot, as the phrase goes. But
Dragging ladies, we give the bike.
Right, but bismam mitzvasan, when it's still time doing the mitzvah, so why are you paying? Why are you trying to get the esrig? You want to be yotzeh, and ultimately you're going to be machzir it. You're just auctioning off the schos to get it first or whatever, and you give it back. So then that's more like selling the mitzvahs that we are mekel, because you're not really buying the esrig, you're just buying the right to do the mitzvah with the esrig.
If that one esrog where the whole community participated, and
right,
probably paid into that.
Right, so that's what he's describing. That there's a form of an auction where you got to take it home, but then you have to bring it back. So in that case, you're not really buying the esrog, you're just buying the mitzvah of doing it first or whatever. And even on the first day of Sukkot, where you really do have to buy the actual esrog, you have to be kohen of the esrog, but it costs almanas lahachzir, so it's still really just the mitzvah. However, you're not allowed to buy legamre, an esrog or shofar on Yom Tov. if you can't be Mekayim, even if you can't be Mekayim the mitzvah any other way, even if this is your only chance of getting the esrog on Sukkot, if you buy it right now for real, you can't do it. So those are just some examples relating to mitzvahs, which are interesting. Of course, there are many, many more details and halachas that relate to these. Halacha vav. More things that are mutter mishum mitzvah. You can get on a boat in the ocean, even out of Shabbos for a mitzvah. The main the source that discusses this halacha in the Rambam is later in Perek Lamed, and maybe then would be the time to talk about the Rebbe's whole campaign relating to traveling and ships on Shabbos, but that's not for now. And you make a deal, you tell the captain that I want you to stop on Shabbos. When Shabbos comes, I want you to stop the ship and stay in one place. And then, as long as you made your wishes clear, then he can ignore you and not stop on Shabbos.
I think you have to go on a ship on a Wednesday.
That's what he's saying. For a Dvar Mitzvah, you can go on Erev Shabbos. That's in reference to the usual halacha, which is that you can't go on Erev Shabbos, which I said that's Perek Lamed. And then the Rebbe had the whole issue with ships that were actually traveling on Shabbos, run by Jews, and the excuse that once you're at sea, maybe it's okay. It's not.
The Zim line, I remember.
Yes. So Rambam continues, Mafir Nedarim b'Shabbos. Hafaras Nedarim refers to a husband and wife. A husband can annul his wife's promises on Shabbos. Bein l'tzarech Shabbos, bein shleil l'tzarech Shabbos. Whether annulling it helps him for Shabbos or not. When it comes to not a husband or wife, when it comes to a man and a chacham getting hataras nedarim, then you can only ask a chacham relating to nedarim that affect Shabbos right now. Umatir, then he can be matir. Even if you had time to undo it before Shabbos, if it's Serech Shabbos, it's mutter. Because these also, it's for Shabbos, so it's a form of mitzvah. The Maggid Mishnah says that this is the Gemara, that hafar is mutter for everything, and hatar is only l'tzarech Shabbos. Why? What's the reason? It's very simple. Hafaras nedarim, a husband can only annul his wife's neder within 24 hours. If he finds out about it on Shabbos, he has to annul it on Shabbos, or else he won't have a chance. So Mamela, even Shalei l'tzarech Shabbos, this is the only time he has. Hataras nedarim is only what you need to deal with on Shabbos. Halacha Zayin, another isser that is similar to what we learned about in this Perek. Ein einshim b'Shabbos. You're not to carry out punishments on Shabbos. Even though meting out punishments is actually a mitzvah, ein adeicha Shabbos, it does not override Shabbos. Ketzad. Example, lashes, death penalty. You don't carry that out on Shabbos. It says not to light a fire, and Lamatas Malachos. We don't need psukim for the Lamatas Malachos. So what's this pasuk telling us? Zuaz hara lebeisdin shelo yisrafu b'Shabbos mishin is chayav sreifa. We're not talking about ordinary fires. We're talking about carrying out the act of sreifa as a punishment. That's not something you should do. V'adin l'shor unshin, and the same goes not just for sreifa but for the rest as well. And the Maggid Mishnah points out that this is actually one of the mitzvahs that the Rambam listed at the beginning of Hilchos Shabbos. There were not that many mitzvahs. Number 1 was lishbois. Number 2 was not to do malacha. And number 3 was shalei lanish b'Shabbos. So this is, we finally got to the third one here in Perek Daled. And Maggid Mishnah says that in some gersais that he saw at the beginning of Hilchos Shabbos, instead of shalei lanish b'Shabbos, it says shalei lehisanos b'Shabbos. He says that's a mistake. That's not one of the Taryag mitzvahs. It's shalei lanish b'Shabbos. It's this. Halacha Ches. Getting back to the point about watching one's Peres on Shabbos, which we mentioned earlier. A person is allowed to protect his fruit on Shabbos, whether it's attached or not. If someone does attempt to take, or an animal attempts to eat, he's allowed to scream and hit and chase away. Now, isn't taking that kind of action, isn't that looking after your affairs? When we say chafatzecha or chaftzecha, we mean that you're acquiring things that you don't have yet. Or to earn, to gain, to deal with something that you could derive pleasure from by pursuing. But if it's something you already have and you're just protecting it, and all you want is that you just stay the way it is, nothing should change. your possessions should remain intact, mutter, that is the kind of affairs that you are allowed to see to on Shabbos. What is this essentially like? It's like locking your door. You don't want people to break in. Halacha tes. So we just said you're allowed to. So if you're watching your plants, your seeds, because of the birds, your cucumbers, your squash, the animals, but you shouldn't clap, hit yourself, or hit something, or dance the way you do during the weekday. Another gzeira that we're afraid that you might get too involved and take a rock, and then they'll end up flying for Amos in a public domain. Halacha Yud, moving on to Bein Hashmashos. All these things are not Aser Bein Hashmashos. Only on Shabbos proper. You can't just do it for no reason. No, there has to be either a mitzvah or you realize you're in trouble. It's an emergency. It's at least something that you'd really rather take care of. You're allowed to climb a tree or float on the water, which we know are just shvusim, in order to get a lulav and a shayfer, which you can't do on Shabbos itself. If you have an erev that you made, an erev tchumen, you have the actual food, and you put it in a tree or you put it in a carmelis, you're still allowed to remove it from there during Bein Hashmashos. Making an actual erev is a different question, that the Rambam is going to discuss in Hilchos Erevin and Perek Vav. And Magen Mishnah also says to look over there. But here it just seems to be talking about moving it. So those are mitzvahs, but also if there's just something very urgent and you really need it, and it's a shvos and it's Bein Hashmashos, it's mutter. But if you have neither, aser. Now the Rambam says you're not allowed to. We mentioned this halacha earlier as well. Previous prakim, that you're not allowed to separate ma'aser from actual tevel during Bein Hashmashos. Even though it's a shvos, because if there's no deichak and there's no mitzvah, then you can't just go ahead and do a shvos. Which is a different thing. We have an exception. Halacha Yud Aleph, for cotton. Cotton she'asa b'Shabbos never shum shvos. If a child, a minor, does something that's a shvos, the goy should tell us me'otzit she'eni nakav tilted b'karmelis. So he ripped a vegetable, a plant, but it wasn't from the ground; it was from a potted plant, or he carried it on a karmelis. Ein based in mitzvah la'afrisha, based in does not have to intervene. And if his father let him do it, we don't confront his father. Now the Magen Mishnah says, Rabbeinu here, it's mashma, that why is based in not mitzvah la'afrisha, because it was a shvus. But if the child was doing a malacha gemura, then based in should get involved. But ain't kenamas, that's not true. Even malachas gemuras or other lavin in the Torah, based in is not mitzvah to stop a child from doing any of those averos. That's the maskan of the Gemara, and even the Rambam wrote this. Even here in Hilchos Shabbos and Perek Beis, when we were learning about the kiboy on Shabbos, what did it say in Perek Beis? If the child comes to put the fire out, midas atzma, ain't based in mitzvah la'afrisha. That was real kiboy. So Mkein Tzarachian, why did the Rambam say Shavos Tafka? The Magen Mishnah remained perplexed. The Kesef Mishnah quotes the Magen Mishnah, and he says, that when the Rambam said Mishum Shavos, so Taka wasn't in reference to the first clause in the halacha, based on mitzvah la'afrisha, because you're right, based on aren't ever mitzvah la'afrisha. But this was all building up towards the last part of the halacha, about the father and confronting the father. Because dafka, when it comes to Yisuri D'Rabbanan, then we don't confront the father. But if the father allows his child to be over in Yisuri Torah, so then we do confront the father. So that's why the Rambam mentions Mishum Shmos. Halacha, Yud Beis, and Yud Gimel. This is in essence an introduction to the Perek or Prakim that come afterwards to deal with Muktzah. It's intro to Muktzah. That's how the Perek concludes. Halacha, Yud Beis, and Yud Gimel. Halacha, Yud Beis. Also, Chacham l'Tata Muktzah Zavanim b'Shabbos and Derech Shoyes b'Chayil. Chacham prohibited carrying certain things in Shabbos in the manner that you carry during the week. Why did they come up with this? Amaru, they said, the Nevi'im, here he attributes it to the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im were mazir. They said that you can't carry yourself. You can't walk on Shabbos while you walk during the weekday. Beloy, that was the Masay Strachacha, the running. Beloy Sichas HaShabbos, Kasichas HaChol, and the conversations. Also, Shnever Daber Dover, both in Halacha Daled, that there shouldn't be Sicha B'Teila. So Kav HaChaymer, Shaliyah, Tiltel B'Shabbos, Ketiltel B'Chayil. So how much more so, the things you carry about on Shabbos. Kadesh Shaliyah, Kiyoim, Chayil B'Einav, so it shouldn't be like a total weekday to you. Yavi like Bia, attacking Kalim Pina Lapina, and Mibayas Labayas, so what are you going to do? You're going to come and you start picking up your furniture and moving your furniture around from corner to corner, from room to room. You're going to start taking large rocks and putting them aside. So technically it's not a malacha, but what kind of Shabbos is that? So if we're talking about how you walk and how you talk, so surely the things you're engaging with and carrying. Person sitting around in his house, he has nothing to do, so he starts looking for things to do like that. And then he wasn't really resting. And then you're losing the whole point. What was the whole point of all these mitzvahs and avedas? It was all to rest. And if you spend the whole day schlepping, so then you're really resting. So the Ravid comments on this. The Ravid says that in Chazal it says, Atu tiltul lav tzerach etzahu, that the idea of not carrying things muktzah is an extension of etzah, that if you carry these things, you might carry it outside. You also have Nehemiah. There's the sources that say that this Indian of muktzah is from the time of Nehemiah, and then they said that certain things you are allowed to carry on Shabbos that before you weren't allowed to. So it seems like, and from the context there as well, it all seems like it's related to etzah. So the Magen Mishnah comments, and the Magen Mishnah says, Rabbeinu kasav bekan taimim nechoinim ma'od. And this is also a reference to Lachiyud Gimel, because there's another reason there, ba'od. Because the Rambam is writing very nice reasons. But it doesn't say these things in the Gemara. And the Ravid says, the Gemara says it's Hitzah. It says the Rambam did not mention that, because the way the Magen Mishnah explains it is that even though originally Tiltul was Aser because of Hitzah in the time of Nehemiah ben Chachalia, yes, back then there was an issue with Hitzah. People weren't being careful, and that was when the original Gzeira of Tiltul started. But then, as we mentioned, then there were matches certain Kalim. And then they said the rest are Aser for new reasons. These are the reasons of the Rambam. And the Gemara is still saying Atu Tiltul Lav Tzerach Etzahu, so it sounds like the Gemara is referring to that even contemporarily. It says it's the Sibur Rishayna. The original reason was for Hitzah, and even though the reason was batal, the Gzeira didn't change. And then the Magen Mishnah says, and it could be that the Rambam mentioned these time that he was Mechadish, doesn't mean that there isn't another Tam, but then near Yoser, I prefer that the Rambam isn't saying, that was either you say the first suggestion that he said, or the Rambam also is not negating what it says in the Gemara. Another reason, when you're interacting with and you're carrying kalim that are used to do an Isser, so you might actually come to start using it and do that malacha. And also on the flip side, you have people that never work, people that sit around and do nothing. Tayalin are people that seem to have it going well, they don't have to work. Ishvikranas are people that just sit around on the corners. Either way, they're not working. And if you can do everything that you do on the weekday, as long as it's not a malach on Shabbos, so what difference is there really between your very lazy weekday and your Shabbos? So therefore, this is something that's across the board though. It's not, we don't pick and choose. Everyone has to avoid these things that are muktzim. And for these reasons, that's how they got to the issue of carrying these things. You can only take the things you actually need. As the Ram shall explain in the coming Kraken.